there, and welcome to the College of Southern Idaho. It's nice to see so many of you here. Oh my word. Truly, when we put on a project like this, it takes years of work. Actually, we began to work on this about 2 years ago, give or take a little bit. And you never know what's going to happen when it's all said and done. And to look out and see so many colleagues and friends and students and community, it makes my heart feel very good. And I want to say thank you very much for being here. I want to be sure to thank some people that are important to making things like this happen. One is President Dean Fisher. Without the president's support, nothing happens on any college, and we have a president who supports our things at our college, which is fantastic. Vice President Tiffany Seeley Case, who is probably our biggest champion, as she ran the honors program a number of years ago. Who else? Whitney Smith-Schuler, a dean, who again is one of the key people that make it happen. There she is right there. Hi, good to see you. And right next to her, my chair, my department chair, Shelley. If it isn't for Shelley McEwen Howard, this really doesn't go, because she's my immediate starting point. And she's a big fan and a big support. So thank you. And most of all, I want to thank this batch of people down here. This is a CSI honors student, and this is brought to you by these people. The CSI honors program, and up there a little bit too, they are the students who make this happen. They help us decide what's going to happen with the next speakers, and they've got this all put together. And so would you mind giving them a little round of applause? That might be kind of nice. There we go. So as I mentioned, a couple of years ago, I began to find an interest in a character from the Civil War. I like to find people that we want to study in the honors program that are people that maybe we should have heard of but never have. And I stumbled upon the topic of tonight's lecture quite by accident, and I stumbled on a video of our speaker quite by accident, and then I found his book because I was interested. I loved the book. One thing led to another, and we began to put this plan together. The reason I don't tell you who it's about is you probably saw the poster. I want our guest speaker to be able to tell us that. He is an avid sailor. He speaks 6 languages. He's lived in multiple countries, and his absolute biggest accomplishment is he's been married to the same wonderful person for 42 years, and that's a marvel to me. So yeah, I agree. Yes. I know his wife Ann is here also, and so it's wonderful to have that. I'm going to call that good. I'm just going to let you know that our guest speaker tonight is Marshall Evans, the author of the book The Wheelman, which I highly recommend, and I hope you enjoy the visit tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, and I think more credit would go to my wife of 42 years than to me, because I was there. All right, we need to set this up a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is please take out your cell phone and make sure it's turned on. Okay, you need your cell phone out, make sure it's turned on. Handy, ready to go, ready to operate. The other thing is you're going to have at some point 2 or 3 people to discuss something with. So I think you're actually kind of spread out in good shape to do that. I'm going to call out the poor dude in the back in the corner. That's where always there's a couple of dudes in the back in the corner. You gotta scoot over and talk to somebody at some point. And all right, I guess we're pretty much ready. The phones are on there. All right, this is Robert Smalls is his name, let's see. I'm going to go back first. I'll go back to the Great Recession, which if you're as old as I am, you remember vividly, probably. But in the Great Recession, which was around 2007, 2008, I was working with my brother doing real estate development. I had done a bunch of stuff, but I kind of wound up back in our hometown. I just rolled out of an assignment being a policy advisor to the governor of our state. I'm from South Carolina. The Great Recession rolled around, we were working on a couple of developments. They started, it didn't just happen overnight. It sort of came over a period of time, and we kept, kind of losing deals, losing contracts. The financing was getting harder and harder. The conversations with the bankers was getting tougher and tougher. And I remember at one point I was reduced to, I was driving a track excavator on one of our projects, at the only project remaining, I think, at that time. Put in some utilities, and at the end of the day, I took a break, and I went up and sat down underneath a pine tree, looking out over this pretty piece of property on a river. And I've long been a kind of a spiritual, religious guy, and so I was kind of praying, what's the, where's this going to go? I got to go talk to the banker tomorrow, and some of you surely have had this experience. I know my wife had it one time, but the voice came. I heard the voice. This voice said, "No, we're going to go in a different direction." And sure enough, I went to go talk to that banker, and he pulled all the funding, and at the age of 50, 51, I went broke. My brother went broke. It was horrible. It got real bad. I got terribly depressed. I became suicidal. I went and got help. I went to the doctor. The doctor said, "I'm sorry, we're going to have to put you inpatient." So they took me over to the neighboring town. My parents drove me over there. They were still alive then. And because everybody else was fed up with me. They dropped me off at the mental hospital where they checked me in, and they made me go back through this locking door, and they made me take my belt off and my shoelaces out and empty my pockets. And I started to cry because, that was pretty hard stuff. And I was this guy who spoke all these languages and used to work at the hedge fund and was advisor to the governor. And now I was broke and in the mental hospital, and they took my shoelaces. So the good thing is that turned out to be a really good time, 48 hours in the mental hospital, probably maybe the best time I ever spent in my life. I got out, I got a job eventually teaching at the local community college, teaching English, and I survived, and after a while, my kids went on to college. Somehow, they went on to college. And we were fighting the foreclosure on the house for years. But I had this job at the community college. It gave me a lot of time, free time, because, it wasn't that hard work. And I'm sorry, but it was quite a gig. Actually, I got a salary, state benefits. And so at one time I was grading papers. I think I mentioned it to you guys today. And if you've ever graded college English papers, it's a pretty grim task, generally. I wonder if ChatGPT, I'm retired now, I wonder if ChatGPT would make that easier. Would they read better? No, they're just as bad? Oh, okay. Well, so anyway, I ran into this one paper, and a young woman who was a really bright student had written about a character in a William Faulkner short story, and he was a black character, and she was black, and she said this guy, he'd think he'd never had any civil rights, he never could vote, had no political power. And I said, well, no, that's not the case with this guy, because he would have lived through Reconstruction. He was old enough, and the setting of the story was such that he did. And so I was going to write her a note about that, and I said, no, I'll just pick out an example of black office holders during Reconstruction in the South. And I started Googling around and, reading on Wikipedia, and after 2 or 3, I ran into this guy, Robert Smalls, and I'm from South Carolina. ancestors was from South Carolina back to the 1700s. And I had never heard of this guy. And I said, my God, how did I not hear this guy? It's incredible. He has this incredible story, which you guys will learn more about shortly. But at the end of the Wikipedia article back then, which I think at this time is about 2011, it was a short article. And they said he got convicted. He had this wonderful life, but he got convicted of bribery and then, kind of disappeared from history. And so I thought, wow, that would be a great book. I'm an English professor. Because it's kind of a Shakespearean tragedy, I'll write a book about this guy. And so I did, and since then I've written several other books. And it's, my life really changed. I ended up retiring from teaching at the community college. My wife and I go sailing half the year in the Caribbean. It's interesting how the years, 18 years since I was in that mental hospital have gone. And I'll get back around to them at the end of the presentation. But just kind of keep that in mind is how I got started. Now, how many of you know who Robert Smalls was? Raise your hand. High, so we can see. It's more than I thought. Okay, so now's the chance to use your phone. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to use your phone and find out everything you can about Robert Smalls. 2 minutes with the phone. You ready? Go. 2 minutes on the phone. Robert Smalls is his name. If you want to listen to videos, that's okay. Whatever you're doing. Chat GPT, have it write an essay for you, whatever. 2 minutes on the phone now. I can't believe they didn't bring their phones. Yeah, I live with one. She doesn't have hers either. All right, how are you doing? Do you need another minute or are you okay? Right? There's a lot? You want one more minute? You got it. 1 more minute. Find out everything you can about Robert Smalls. Okay, time's up. No more phone. Now what I want you to do is turn to the 2, 3, 4 people around you, and you've got 2 minutes to discuss what you just learned, okay? 2 minutes to discuss what you just learned. Go. Okay, time's up. All right, so now you know that Robert Smalls was an enslaved guy who stole the largest Confederate ship in Charleston Harbor, steamed it out past the forts in Charleston Harbor by giving the secret codes on the steam whistle because he knew the codes. And he gave the ship to the Union Navy blockade. So I'm going to hit the high points here. He became the first U.S. black American to command a U.S. Military ship. He convinced Abraham Lincoln, personally convinced Abraham Lincoln to allow enlistment of African American soldiers in the Civil War. After the war, he was very active, and for a while the most famous, arguably the most famous American in the North during the Civil War after he stole that warship. He was very notorious in the Confederacy. After the war, he moved back to his hometown of Beaufort, South Carolina, bought his master's old house where he lived for the rest of his life. Later, his master's widow moved in with Smalls and his family. Smalls was elected as a Republican. He was one of the founders of the Republican Party in South Carolina. He was elected to the South Carolina State Senate, where he proposed and championed and passed the first mandatory public education, statewide education system in the U.S. In South Carolina, and later served, I'm sorry, forgive me, 5 or 6 terms in the U.S. Congress, was a national figure in the Republican Party nationally, and he was later written completely out of U.S. history, nearly forgotten by the time he died in 1911, I believe. There was a brief mention of his passing in a Charleston paper that didn't say a thing about anything he'd accomplished in his life. A couple of black-oriented papers in the North mentioned in brief obituaries, his passing. And he was forgotten until really, I would say, arguably the 1970s. There was one graduate student wrote a dissertation about him. The first books that reached the slightly smaller circulation came out in the early 2000s. Now, as you can see, when I wrote my book, it came out in 2015. It's a novel, and Small's story features heavily in there. That was maybe the fourth or fifth book out that had ever mentioned Smalls, and the others were all out of print. Now, if you happen on an Amazon page, like a dozen. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote a children's book about Robert Smalls, even. So he's quite popular. And the South Carolina legislature, within the last year, passed unanimously in both houses of the legislature a bill to put a statue of Robert Smalls on the State House property. It would be the first monument to a specific African American in South Carolina history on the State House property. South Carolina is really kind of a one-party state. It's a Republican state. It was designed to be that way by the next guy we're going to talk about. It passed unanimously, and I was quite disturbed by this when I read it, because usually, I know from working in the governor's office, anything that passes the South Carolina legislature unanimously is a dirty deal. I mean, it's bad news, okay? Some lobbyist has shoved that thing through in the middle of the night, and money is, it's not a good thing. So I called up the young white Republican legislator who had been the co-sponsor of the bill, and he told me the story of how it passed, and it was just amazing. This guy was so enthusiastic about the project, and he was astonished that it passed because of the support of the Speaker of the House, who is, this kind of good old boy, white Republican. And once he got behind it, he said he turned to his chief of staff in front of the young legislator and said, "Make this happen." And it happened. So strangely enough, that's kind of how Robert Smalls has happened through history. All right, I'm gonna bring up the next guy in our conversation. How many of you have heard of Pitchfork Ben Tillman? Raise your hand high. All right, that's looks like honor students. Got it. Okay. All right. So once again, I'm going to give you 2 minutes on the phone. Pitchfork Ben Tillman. Tillman. Pitchfork Ben Tillman. Go. Tillman. Tillman. Read, you can talk later. Okay, your time's up. Now you've got 2 minutes to discuss Pitchfork Ben Tillman with the people around you. 2 minutes. Let's go. All right, stop. So, as you know and have now discussed, Pitchfork Ben Tillman was a white supremacist who led the Democratic Party in taking over the state of South Carolina. They took over the state of South Carolina through violence and intimidation and murder. At the time that Tillman got involved in politics, my grandfather, by the way, was a member of his organization. Not my grandfather, my great-grandfather was a member of his organization, the Red Shirts. I knew that long before I knew what the Red Shirts did. 60% of the population of South Carolina was African American, 40% was white. That was the case in Mississippi and Louisiana also. That had always been the case as long as there had been censuses since the founding of the United States. Yet the whites and the white Democrats under Ben Tillman managed to take complete control of the government of the state of South Carolina by the 1890s, okay? For over a generation, the majority African American population held the majority of the political power in the state. Tillman put an end to that. He called a constitutional convention in 1895. He invited Robert Smalls and 4 or 5 other black leaders who had formerly had political power to this constitutional convention where they fought as hard as they could, but it was already a done deal. The Constitutional Convention wrote this constitution that created a one-party state for eternity in South Carolina. Started out as a Democratic Party, but in the 1970s that switched to the Republican Party. Doesn't matter as long as it is run by white people, okay? Still the case today. The Constitution of the state of South Carolina, written in 1895 and passed, strips African Americans of the right to vote and all civil rights. So it essentially repeals the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States that were passed after the Civil War. That didn't matter. Similar constitutions were passed all across the former Confederacy in that same decade, and the US Supreme Court upheld them and said, yeah, that's perfectly okay. And that was the law of the land until I was a young boy. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1964 restored the rights of African Americans to vote, really across the South. That some provisions of that may be overturned by the Supreme Court in the spring now. The case was heard yesterday, I think. I think you should, I'm going to do this. My wife doesn't want me to do it. And quite seriously, and I've listened very respectfully to her. The last time I read this quote of Pitchfork Ben Tillman to an audience, one woman just got up and walked out. And I don't blame her at all for doing that. It's extremely offensive. When Theodore Roosevelt was elected president, when he became president after McKinley's assassination, he invited Booker T. Washington to the White House to have lunch with him one day. And when the word got out to the press, Ben Tillman, who was at that time the senior senator from South Carolina, and a nationwide figure of respect and enthusiasm. He had nearly become the Democratic nominee for president. He was very, very popular because he campaigned and spoke all across the nation on his white supremacist platform. Okay? He said, we've got to get control of African Americans or non-white people in the United States. It made him one of the most popular people in the country. And he learned that Roosevelt had lunch with Booker T. Washington, who was Robert Small's good friend and frequent correspondent in the White House. Tillman was quoted the next day in the New York Times as saying this, and this is quite shocking. I'm going to read it exactly as he said it. The action of President Roosevelt in entertaining that nigger will necessitate our killing 1,000 niggers in the South before they will learn their place again. I think he underestimated the amount of killing that was going to take place. But that's Ben Tillman, the largest statue on the lawn of the South Carolina State House, and it's right in front of the State House. First thing you see, now that they've taken down the Confederate flag, is Pitchfork Ben Tillman. And the Smalls Memorial is supposed to go kind of facing Tillman, right in front of him. But the Tillman statue's not leaving, okay? And the main hall, the main administration building at Clemson University is called Tillman Hall. For 30 years, people have tried to get that name changed. The legislature won't let it change. All right. How many of you have heard of Jim Crow? All right, so a lot of you know of Jim Crow. Now I'm going to give you 2 minutes on the phone to find out everything you can about Jim Crow. Jim Crow. 2 minutes on the phone. All right, we'll stop it there. A lot of you are beginning to cheat and talk while you read on the phone, but I didn't really want to stop. Okay, I didn't want to stop you. It's okay. It's really, you can tell it's okay with me. But you've got 2 minutes now to talk about what you just read, okay? 2 minutes. All right, let's stop it there. So when I was young, I started off going to, I'm 67 years old. I started off going to segregated schools in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I went to first grade in 1964. When I was in the third grade, the teacher came into the class with the most dour look on her face and said, I'm sorry, I've got very disturbing news to tell you that it looks like little colored boys and girls are going to have to come to our school. That didn't happen until I was in the 7th grade in 1970, which was 16 years after Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court ruling that mandated that schools be integrated in the South. At the time, you know, this was controversial and it was all over the news, and what we were taught was that this Jim Crow era that you read about and you discussed was the segregation era. Because, you know, you had those water fountains. Did you learn about those when you were kids? The water fountains had white only, color. I remember them. I remember when I went with the African-American maid to the movie. We had to ride in the back of the bus. We had to sit up in the balcony. I can remember that. I'm old, but not that horribly old. But I hope you got enough of an idea that Jim Crow was not about segregation. It was about the systematic denial of basic human rights to the majority of the population in South Carolina, 60% of the population, Mississippi, Louisiana. By 1960, when supposedly Jim Crow came to an end, thanks to legislation that the Supreme Court is now beginning to pick apart, the black population of South Carolina was 40% of the population, and the white population was 60%. I heard from my father who'd heard from his father that in the 1920s in Newberry, South Carolina, on Market Day, which was Saturday, there was a bus to Chicago. And any black person could get on the bus for free one way to Chicago. Now, I tried to look for that in the historical record. I could find nothing about it. I didn't mention it in any book I've ever written. My brother was in the last talk I gave like this back in the summer. He came up afterwards. He said, you know, Daddy Cop, our grandfather, used to say, he told me that they had a bus in downtown Newberry on Market Day in the 1920s. So I don't doubt the story. We know that as the Great Migration, right? That's what we were taught. It was something other than that. It was African Americans fleeing violence and complete lack of civil rights in the South, going to northern cities or western cities where they were met by violent white crowds that attacked their encampments, and they were not allowed to have any jobs of any type. Eventually, they were allowed to collect the trash and be domestic servants. Anyway, it's different maybe than what you learned. Your next thing to read about on your phone is We Charge Genocide. We Charge Genocide. That's what you type in. We Charge Genocide. You get We Charge Genocide. Genocide. You guys were quiet on that one. Okay, stop and now talk about it for 2 minutes. Talk about what you just read. 2 minutes. All right, let's stop it there. Now, I'd like everybody in the room to stand up if you're able. Stand up for a moment. I promise I won't make you do any more phone and talking stuff, okay? But I want you to now think about this. You just, spent about 10 minutes finding out true stuff on your phone on the internet. And then you spent another 10 minutes discussing the most divisive, weighty, horrible, fearful topic in American history in civil tones with each other. I didn't see any fist fights, okay? I'd like you all to turn and congratulate each other. Fist bumps, handshakes, hugs, high fives. Now, I'd like you all to give yourselves a standing ovation. That really wasn't so damn hard, was it? All right, now I'll talk some, sing for my supper, sure. Go ahead, you have a seat. Thank you. We charge genocide is something I didn't know a thing about until I started working on this book. The argument it came about because in 1946, a lawyer named Raphael Lemkin, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, worked hard to develop a law, an international law that was adopted by the UN against genocide. And to do that, he was trying to create a crime that would describe the Nazi atrocities in World War II. So the UN passed I believe, the law, international law against genocide in 1946. I could be off by a year or two. And when was this We Charge Genocide? 52, 54? 51, okay, so 5 years later maybe. The Congress of Racial Equality in the US, which was a communist-affiliated group back then, but it was the leading arguably the leading civil rights group at the time, came up with this document. I've read the entire document. It's not hard to read. And it makes this really brilliant and not difficult to dispute case by listing all the things that were going on in 1951. And actually, they were only talking about the period from 1946 to 51, when it was a crime under international law to commit genocide against people. They make a very strong case that what was going on from 1946 to 1951 in the U.S. with the sanction of the U.S. government, the Supreme Court, and all the state governments was genocide against African Americans. Back when I was teaching and I did these presentations more often, I had a whole series of slides where I'd gone back and looked at the possible effects on African American population in the U.S. from these policies. Not the possible, the actual, because I would look at the demographics. And, I'm not a demographer. I'm an English teacher and a novelist. But in the presentation, I showed that from 1920 to 1940, the impact of African American lives shortened by malnutrition, denial of medical care, violence, legal discrimination, was in the millions of lives cut short in that 20-year period. But Jim Crow lasted from the 1890s until 1960, which is a period of 70 years, over 3 generations. So it's a big bad scene. I read a book recently by a guy named Alex Hinton, who's a sociology professor at, you're a sociology professor, aren't you, Brian? At Rutgers University, and he's an internationally recognized expert on genocide. And he has testified at criminal trials of people who've been convicted of genocide, like the Khmer Rouge, leaders of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. It was a very difficult, he wrote a book that came out 3 or 4 years ago, before the second Trump administration, and in which he made the case that there is a really strong possibility of genocide breaking out in the United States at the current point in history. I learned a lot about genocide from his book. Apparently, one of the prerequisites for genocide is a history of genocide in the society. This is one genocide. I think we can identify others, probably against Native Americans, lest you guys, the first one, the first genocide against Native Americans, according to Alex Hinton and other historians, is in the early 1600s, like 6 to 9 years after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. They and some neighboring Indian tribes completely wiped out the Pequod Nation, killed everybody in the tribe. Whoever survived, they sold them into slavery in Bermuda, and the Pequods ceased to exist. But there are lots of instances, the Trail of Tears. We're here in Idaho, lest you guys are feeling too self-righteous. I just was reading about the Bear River Massacre, which apparently was what opened the door for settlement here in this part of Idaho, where during the U.S. Civil War, the American Army attacked a village of Shoshone and killed hundreds of people. Anyway, there's a history of genocide. The other prerequisites, he said, were kind of a lot of civil unrest and tension, political tension. And the thing that most disturbed me was that genocide, I'd always thought of it, and I thought of the Holocaust as being Adolf Hitler directing everybody, go round up these people and kill them. But that's not how genocide happens. Genocide is always kind of brewing there in the population. And when these conditions are met, leadership allows it to happen or encourages it to happen, and there's enough civil unrest, it just sort of breaks out. Like in Rwanda, you ever seen that movie, The Hotel Rwanda? It just breaks out, and they start killing people. So it's very disturbing. It was a difficult book for me to read. It's called It Can Happen Here. I couldn't quite finish it at the end because it's written 3 or 4 years ago, and it's saying, these are the terrible things I see in the political system that are happening, and I'm thinking, oh no, we ought to. Now you see, it's even worse. So it's something to think about. It's not. I think we ought to think about all of this pretty hard. My next question, and I'm not going to make you discuss this one. I'm just going to talk about it. Does history tell the truth? Does history tell the truth? When Brian first, not when he first contacted me, back in the spring, it became clear I was going to come do this. A friend was down on the boat in the Caribbean with us. She's a history teacher. And she said, when she first walked into a graduate class in history, the professor wrote up on the board, all history is a lie. And she thought, that's just some graduate school BS. Says, by the end of the course, I realized, well, he's kind of got a point. And not in the way that all those college freshmen I taught, forgive me, college freshmen, over the years would tell me. They'd say, there's no such thing as the truth. It's all relative. And to which I say at the age of 67, baloney, BS. There is the truth. Right now at 8 o'clock on the 16th of October, I'm standing up on this stage talking. You guys are sitting in the audience. According to scientific research, some 10% of you are actually listening to what I'm saying at any one point. That's truth, okay? But we also know that the moment we all go away from here and start talking about what happened, we played telephone as a kid, the stories we tell are going to differ from the truth. They have to some extent. For instance, you could tell the story. One person could walk out of here and say, there was this kind of boring old man, bald as hell, who gave this interminable lecture, and at 2 points, he said that word that you can't even say in public anymore, right in front of God and all of College of Southern Idaho. Or somebody else could say, there was this fascinating talk about the history of African American people in the United States, and this guy, was even so passionate about it, he even said that word that you can't even say that, if he wasn't retired, he wouldn't say it because he'd get fired for it. Now, those are two versions of what happened that you all saw, and they both are truthful versions. So there are probably an infinite number of truthful versions that can be told about the truth. And as we all know, there's an infinite number of lies that can be told about the truth. And we do love to lie. And we love to be lied to. Think about that for a moment. Why do we like to be lied to so much? I'm going to circle back around to the time in the mental hospital. My brother and I went broke. He'd been quite a wealthy guy. I wasn't wealthy, but I was, very successful. And, had this great resume. My father had been a wealthy guy, very wealthy guy. After I got out of the mental hospital, my brother was diagnosed with cancer, stage 4 colon cancer. And he didn't have any health insurance because we were broke. And so my brother and my father and I had to go to the free clinic in South Carolina, in Spartanburg, the town we live in, which it turned out that day was staffed by volunteers from my church, whom we all knew socially and from church. And we had to sit in there with the crowds, stand outside in the cold. My brother was stage 4 cancer with all the other sick people. And then we had to go in and we had to sit for a long time. We had to talk to our friends who were in there handling the applications. In the end, astonishingly, my brother was cured, and he's still alive, and he's the one that told me about the bus in Newberry this summer. But one thing that happened to my brother and me and my father over the intervening 18 years is that we lost all our money. And the way that's worked out, we all are so damn much happier. We are so much happier and more free and more blessed. And my wife and I spend half the year, I'm not exaggerating, on our yacht in the Caribbean. It's, you know, it's a 40-foot sailboat. It's real old. But we've barely got 2 nickels to rub together. We're happy as larks. So it took a lot of grace, let's say, for me to get that message. It had to be hammered through a very thick skull. I had to go in the mental hospital. I had to go broke. But now, you know, I write novels. I spend half the year in the Caribbean. I come and talk to you guys, and I don't have any money, and I'm so much happier, which tells me, as a 67-year-old guy, you know, I lived a lie. I believed a lie my whole friggin' life because my parents, my grandparents, our neighbors, our friends, my teachers, the entire society told me a friggin' lie. And the truth was lying there right in front of us. You know, I used to go to Sunday school when I was a kid, and Jesus would say, no, you shouldn't have money. It's going to make you miserable. You can't serve God and mammon. But I didn't believe, nobody around me lived like that. You know, we got to get some money so we'll be happy. And you probably all think the same thing, and your teachers and your parents tell you the same thing. So lies are everywhere. I was given the example to some of the honors students at lunch. I've got 6 grandsons. They're all under the age of 6. I spend a lot of time with them, which means I watch a lot of cartoons. And in the cartoons, almost immediately I'll say, is that the bad guy? And they'll say, yeah, bad guy! Or, you know, the 2-year-olds say, bad guy, bad guy! And then later I'll say, is that the good guy? Yeah, good guy, good guy, good guy, good guy. Well, we all look for the bad guy and the good guy, right? That's our favorite thing. Politicians know that. The other guys are the bad guys. They're the good guys. People who get you to sign up to go to a war or support a war, you know, those are the bad guys. We're the good guys. The reality, it's a lie. I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's a lie that we love. Human beings are all good and we're all bad. We're all capable of good, we're all capable of evil. Even Pitchfork Ben Tillman could be a good guy or be an evil guy. Robert Small, same thing. Me, we all do it every day. We do good stuff and evil stuff. And that's the truth. But we'd rather believe the lie. So I think my experience writing that book, which happened by grace because I went broke and went in the mental hospital and read Wikipedia, led me to understand that much of what I thought was the history of America is pretty much a lie. And it's pretty easy to find the truth. So I'll leave you with that. I've got a quote to read to you at the end, and this one, I promise you, is better than the other one that I read. This is by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who, you want to talk about a lie. This guy lived in the Soviet Union. He wrote this in his book, The Gulag Archipelago, which was about how the vast system of brutal prison camps run in the Soviet Union for dissidents or people who just didn't do whatever was politically correct at the time. You know, all in the name of social justice and equality for all people and equal rights, making sure, eliminating poverty, curing disease, going to the moon. So this is Solzhenitsyn's quote. If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being? And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? All right, I'm finished now, but I will answer any questions you may have. Thanks. What do you want to do the questions? Or? You guys ask the questions, and I'll get Brian to answer them. Yeah.
Could you repeat the name of the writer whose book on genocide that you said you read?
Yeah, it's Alex Hinton.
Hinton?
Yeah, Hinton, Hinton. It Can Happen Here. It's a tough read, but I think it's good.
I was just going to differ with you. I think Warren Buffett's very, very happy.
I have. Do you have a question? Okay. Yeah.
Questions? I know honors students will have questions because that's part of what they do so well.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Here, let me give you the microphone here, Ammon. There you go.
So I kind of grew up in an environment that was very sympathetic to the lost cause. And, you know, I've had to kind of learn and separate myself from that. What's some great ways to try to help other people see the truth? That what they romanticize and what their fathers have romanticized and their grandfathers, that's not true.
I don't know. It's kind of like my friend. I was trying to convince that Warren Buffett was maybe not as happy as I am, but I don't know. I don't have the answer. At my age, I realized that you can tell them they're wrong, but that doesn't work very well. It's interesting, and I'm not claiming any genius in this. It's just something I thought I'd try. That you guys went through really close to half an hour of inquiry and discussion on a subject that will generally get any group of people to absolutely clam up, freeze up, and get that look in their face like they really want to just kill you. And I can say that from having taught for 25 years, that you can't get a group of students to discuss the things that you guys were learning about and discussing. So, what was going on there? I'm not sure. You did it yourself. I didn't do it to you.
Maybe one more question? Oh, want to come up and get you there?
Thank you. Yeah, my question is, was Robert Smalls forgotten? Why was he forgotten over that period of history? Was it because of the...
He was written out of history.
Why did that happen is what I'm asking.
So what?
Why did that happen? Why was he written out of history? Was it because of the culture of South Carolina?
I'm going to give you an oblique. I think it's an American thing, okay? Because he was written out of American history. I'm going to give you a bit of an oblique answer. For several years after I found out about Robert Smalls, I still taught in South Carolina, and I would occasionally ask classes if they'd gone to public school in South Carolina, did you ever hear of this guy? And almost invariably they had not heard of him, even though he's a South Carolina hero and they had been to public school. And so I would tell them about it, and I so distinctly remember, although this happened many, many times, it was one African-American young man, and I was telling him, Smalls was this former slave, bought his master's house, served in Congress, was the founder of the Republican Party. And the guy kept saying, "Hey, are you kidding me? Some black guy did this." No, no, you gotta be kidding me. And I said, and he stole the largest Confederate warship in Charleston Harbor and gave it to the Union. He said, "Oh, so he was a thief. Now I can believe you." So what was going on there, and it was, you know, this is not something that somebody made the American people do. It's the American people did it quite willingly. That, you know, Ben Tillman was an enormously popular politician. After he called out President Roosevelt for inviting Booker T. Washington to eat at the White House, no African American was invited back to the White House until late in the 1930s. So for 3+ decades, no president invited an African American person. This was all a campaign to make African Americans think less of themselves and to make everybody else think less of them. And to have that guy be part of American history was against what American history was trying to accomplish.
Do we have another question? Yeah, give it a shot.
So you brought up the We Charge Genocide document,
Yeah.
which made use of the Genocide Convention of the UN. So another country has recently used the Genocide Convention to accuse the state of Israel of committing a genocide against the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And this question might depend on how much you keep up with the news, but do you see any similarities between Israeli treatment of Palestinians and the treatment of Black Americans under Jim Crow here in the States?
You're really now trying to get me to, you really want to pick a fight, right? I'll tell you this story because seriously, our best friends are Jewish, and they have been, he's been my dear friend since the age of 3. We lived across the street from each other. And on October 7th, after the Hamas attack, they invited us over for dinner because we had discussed Gaza for a decade or two before then. And they wanted to find out what I thought. Well, they already knew what I thought, okay? They knew perfectly well what I thought. But they were just going to town on me. They were kind of attacking me on the subject. And as a result, they would not speak, our best friends would not speak to me for like 6 months. They literally, they said, "No, you're no longer our friend." Now we've had long conversations about it. I think we still pretty much disagree, but we're best friends again. So, and my inclination is to think that there were elements at the very top of the Israeli government that really were trying to implement a genocide or an ethnic cleansing against Gaza. But I pray to God that it has stopped prematurely before it happened. Yeah.
You said civil unrest was one of the precursors to genocide. Is there any example of a country that has taken the initiative to dampen down civil unrest in an effective way? And if so, how did they do that?
Okay, I've read Hinton's book, and I haven't finished the book because it was so distressing, but so I don't know that I'm really qualified to give an answer there. He does talk about ways that societies can back away from genocide. And forgive me, I'm an English teacher and a novelist, so I'm not going to give you a list of stuff, but I think that we've done some of that here tonight. Have civil discourse, talk to each other, create safe spaces where people can talk to each other and talk about the truth. And that, you know, what can you and I do? This is something we can do. We can all do it.
Can I encourage a last round of applause for the
called civil discourse. The ability to talk about things even when we disagree, that are difficult things, and be civil and decent to each other to try to understand. You just demonstrated what 150, 200 people can do really quite effectively, and hats off to you. Have a very good night. Hug your loved ones when you see them.